Sup Shredders, my name is Logan, aka Spiderhands, and welcome to an SP Reviews, where today we have ourselves a track from an act named Eyes, titled Busy, and if we switch over to here, we have ourselves the track on the screen on Spotify. We're going to listen through it from start till finish, and we're going to hear what we think. Let's go, what do we got? Okay, so before we get into this, I want to talk about the things that I'm enjoying and the things that I'm a little bit ambivalent about. The harpsichord that we've got going on with the keys and the drum beat and the bass and everything, that's nice and tight. And I do like the iteration of the busy, the hook line there. Those vocal chops, I'm not necessarily sure if I'm a massive fan with. Like, I know that I've heard vocal chops in music in a lot of different genres. It's a lot more popular nowadays, but I don't know if I'd recommend it being as present in the mix. If they had been a little bit quieter in the mix as more of a sub layer or something like that, I feel like that would have been more effective. But everything else is good. I like the swagger. I like the self-confidence. It's genuinely dope. I think it's cool. Yeah, no, really compelling story here. I think everyone kind of knows what's going on, which is good. It's not for kids, but music doesn't need to be for kids, you know. I like the backing vocals on the sides. I think they're done well. I feel as if you could have potentially put a little bit of reverb to kind of soften the effect they have on the sides there and to kind of help the backing parts on the sides of the stereo field sit a little bit better in the mix. But I appreciate what we're trying to do there. We're trying to have the focus point of the listener go from the side main to the sides, etc. The idea is good. We just, a little bit of reverb would have helped that kind of smooth out. Oh, okay. So, like, we know that we're attractive and we know that we can do all these things for, like, you know, the guys, but at the same time, we're too busy to do that. We've got our own stuff to do, and that makes us happy that we've got something going on to kind of do as an alter. I mean, I think that's great. I mean, I think it'll be more relatable, I suppose, for people, you know.
I'm the highest you can beat my score. I'm super hot, I got golden vocal cords. Yeah.
What I think is a saving grace of this track in a certain respect is that we have variation with the different vocal parts where they are in a stereo field. I know I mentioned that before, but because the theme is basically here as a constant with the backing and the different instruments, there's like a little kind of bum bum bum, little perky kind of charismatic sub-lead there, but most of the elements are kind of been continued with occasional breaks, and I like the fact the vocals are very laid up. changes the drum grooves, so to be clear.
It's not that I don't want to talk to you. It's just that I got a lot of stuff to do. A diamond in the rough, a diamond in the eye. It's the crazy one, and I'm not left eye. Too many dudes running gas.
Nice little rapping section there as well. It's dope.
Too many dudes be asking me over. I'm really busy. I'm really busy. I stay busy, so be calling me later. Diamond in the rough, a diamond in the eye. It's the crazy one, and I'm not left eye. Can't touch it, touch it, touch it. Can't touch it. It's the crazy one, and I'm not left eye. Can't touch
What's the
it.
dynamic range in the vocal track?
Diamond in the eye. It's the crazy one, and I'm not left eye.
We've got a theme kind of leading us out. Are we going to do a fade out? Oh, we are. Oh, that's a classy way of ending it. No, I like that. Oh, that's cool. That's cool. All right, let's finish this. And welcome to the conclusion of my review of this track from Eyes, titled Busy. You know what do I think this track is about? I think this track is about someone who's telling all the good things that they can do for someone, how attractive they are. There's lots of self-confidence there. And, you know, you even got the girlfriends being angry about all the attention that they're getting and stuff like that. So, yeah, you know, the story develops and progresses as we go along, and it makes use of the different verses within it, with the busy bee, of course, being the hook line and the main focal point, getting back to how busy they are despite what they can offer. They've got other things they do and they need to prioritize. So that's fine. The vocal performance was good. I liked the clean vocals. I liked the rapping. I thought the technique for both was great. I think that you could clearly hear the words there. Most of the words, for the most part, you know, were articulated well. They were clear. The use of the hidden chest voice was good. I wasn't entirely sold on those vocal chops at the start. I know that they were more of a sort of instrumental thing as opposed to like a main sort of vocal focus, but at the same time, again, if they had been maybe a little bit quieter or like softened a little bit, I feel like they would have been more effective. You know, same with how I felt about some of the backing vocal parts and like the mid-half of the track, the halfway point of the track. I think that, or at least in the end of some of those verse sections, I liked the fact that we were going between the sides of the stereo field. We didn't just have the vocals in the center, we had them on the left and right sides. I think that was cool. It's just, they were noticeably, I suppose maybe they were perceived as being louder because there was a part they hadn't really been in yet, so it was surprising when they came in. It would have been nice maybe to have just added a bit of reverb in there to kind of soften the sound of it. The notes were hit well. It's not a fact of it not being harmonized well or anything like that. The harmonies were fine and the melodies were good, and there was a lot of variety within that, as well as the groove within the rapping sections. There's a good understanding of rhythm. You know, I don't. It's not about the vocal technique or anything like that. I suppose any comments I have are more about the post-production, but that's okay. Even then, there's very few, so that's okay. Ultimately, I'm happy with the vocal performance, and I think that it segged well with the lyrics. You know, again, there was that charisma to it. She genuinely sounded like she was selling it 100%, and that's always a good thing, because you cannot do a song like this and not fully commit to that sort of persona, whether it's like who you are or it's who you're trying to be. I think in addition to that, the song at 3 minutes 50, it's on the longer half of the 2 to 4 minute sweet spot. Now, around the time I was talking about the variety of vocals being important because it had the same motif being repeated, we had differences within the different drum grooves. Like we had some kick snare focuses there, and then we had some more sort of 16th hi-hat note focuses there on the kit. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think in actuality that range was great there. And we also had a rapping section next, which was very satisfying. I think that if we had had vocals, just the clean vocals there with those verse and chorus lines for the entirety of the time without the rapping, I don't think the song would have been as good. I'm glad that we understood that we needed to mix it up a little bit. I can assume, given this, that if we were going to do shorter tracks, we'd maybe stick with one style or the other, or maybe intermingle the both. But ultimately, I think that there was good use of that time. I don't necessarily mind that we didn't have further development in regards to the compositional layers there as we went through, because I think that having, again, that the harpsichord, piano, bass, drum combination kind of put into the mix earlier rather than later, with the variety of the vocal performance there, what was solid, and that little instrumental lead I mentioned earlier, like that was around the halfway point, kind of highlighting the chorus parts, filled it nicely. I don't think that we needed any other additional lead layers because of the fact that we had the vocals with their variety with between the backing vocals, the mains, and then the rapped parts. We've already talked about the drums. You had 2 or 3 main grooves there that were adjusted for the different sections of the track there, and we knew to remove them sometimes and take away. We had moderation and variety, as well as an equilibrium set there with the bass nicely controlled in that low end. It really was a heavy bass, like if it was isolated, but they managed to make it fit. It suited the chord progressions really well, operating around those root notes, and it wasn't overly complicated. I think that worked in its favor. The harpsichord had an interesting sort of almost risque kind of tone to it, and the piano highlighted those mid to high ranges of that chord progression and harmony really nicely. I mean, the harpsichord was a lead, to be fair, alongside the vocals, but it was more of a neutral tone setting one, and I think that the pianos kind of worked well on top of that with the little lead that I was saying, just a little bit of extra character and sparkle. Ultimately, like the combination of these different layers alongside the vocals and the story stick together really well, because I think there was a little bit of menace, a little bit of something naughty or cheeky going on with the way that it sounded, as if someone was about to do like a stage play or as a show or something like that, and their life was a show, and effectively you are the person watching it, and maybe you want to touch but you can't because you're not allowed to because they're busy. You know what I mean? So I think that's great. I think that's actually well connected. I don't really have any complaints about that. It's a good job. So with all that stuff out of the way and a nice sense of synergy among the different elements there, we basically have the studio recording, the mixing and mastering. Now, I've already spoken about how I feel about the little vocal chops at the start and the backing vocals, so I'm not really going to focus on them here. I'm happy with the clarity of the vocals. In general, I'm wondering if you could put a little bit of reverb, maybe like a delay on it, just to help it kind of sit in the mix a bit more naturally. Because if you have vocal takes that are, these aren't the backings or the chops, I'm just talking about the vocals in general. If they're too raw, they can kind of sound like they were recorded in a different room than what we have with the rest of the instruments. And while that may seem like, well, yeah, I'm recording them separately, the problem is especially if you have more sort of analog instruments like the piano and stuff like that, you might want to have more sound like they're together. So, you know, obviously you put a reverb on the master chain, but it can also be good to put a little bit of reverb on the vocals themselves just to help them kind of float a little bit. Outside of that, I think that, you know, the leveling in general was good, apart from what I've spoken about. The instruments formed really nicely together. The theme itself with the different instrumental layers was tight. There was nice side chaining of the kit, with the bass being nicely behaved in the low end, with the pianos, harmonicas and stuff filling the mids and highs. Things were nice in the stereo field with movement between the different elements there, going backwards and forwards, especially with the aforementioned vocal parts. So that was good, retained interest. There was dynamic range. There was definitely dynamic range. There were some parts near the end where it was the vocals in the center and the rap parts, and there were some quieter bits, and then they got loud for a moment. So you could tell that we weren't trying to compress the vocals too much. I think that leads to the impression that it is less effects saturated and it's more of an organic performance, which I appreciate. It's just worth bearing in mind that I think if we had more dynamic range with the vocals than what we had, I don't think that would have been something that was preferential. It can often be better to kind of tighten the rapping parts with a more harsh ratio to kind of get everything sounding a similar volume, but it still was okay here. And then finally, things were nice and loud without pumping, so limiting the bus compression was handled well. I mean, effectively, this is my review of this track from BIZY, titled Busy. And as it was my first impression, it was a good first impression. I like the vast majority of it, and I wish them the best of luck in future. And if you enjoyed this track, please do go show them some love via their various social medias and their Spotify page. And stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they need the help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next review. Spiderhands out.